when we go to the doctor, they tell us to exercise more. And we just kind of roll our eyes and say, yeah, okay. But if we flip the script and say, hey, what was like a sport you played as a kid and you would have no idea how to get involved with now, but that you might be curious about resuming again? That totally flips the conversation. Same end goal, you're still getting that movement, that exercise, but it's a way that's more fun and approachable.
This is the Home of Healthspan podcast, where we profile health and wellness role models, sharing their stories and the tools, practices, and routines they use to live a lively life. Julia, it has been a long time coming, and maybe it doesn't seem, it seems long to me because I've been following you online, read your book, and was absolutely blown away. Thank you so much for being here. How are you today?
Thank you so much, Andrew. Likewise, I think we are a little bit of book soulmates here. So I'm great today, and I'm so happy to talk about it with you.
I could not be happier, right? Like this is a connection that I have very much been looking forward to doing live, and I'm happy today that we can do it. But before we jump in to the connection cure and all the things, how would you define yourself? Describe yourself.
Sure. So I would define myself as a lively journalist who is reporting on solutions to some of today's biggest problems. I work for an organization, the Solutions Journalism Network, where we also work with other journalists to report with rigor and evidence the same way they would with any story, but hopefully to infuse a little bit of optimism and help people believe, hey, the world might be getting better after all.
That is so incredible. I just finished Hope for Cynics that talks a lot about that of, hey, I pair the doom journalism with the solution of, okay, wait, and here's best practices of what people are putting in place. So I just love the work you do. I just absolutely love the work you do.
Thank you. Likewise. And, we need both. Of course, we need to hear about everything going wrong. But I think parents, I know you have a daughter, and I think parents especially resonate with the analogy of like, if you have a kid and your kid does something wrong, of course you let them know, but you also give them some positive reinforcement and try to encourage them when they're doing something right. And I think our information, ecosystem is no different. We also need to hear about when problem solving goes well.
Absolutely. And so speaking of these kinds of solutions, right, one of the big problems, right, we talk about the loneliness epidemic in the US, but it is a global phenomenon, I think, in many, many countries at this point. And that was one that you went real deep on and published an absolutely phenomenal book, The Connection Cure, through some of these solutions and what some societies, some health systems and others are doing. So I would love, if you don't mind sharing, kind of setting the table for what is the problem we're facing there and what are some of these best practice solutions you came across?
Sure. So, I think when people even hear that word loneliness, they have a really sort of cultural picture of what that is. They picture an older adult who's super isolated, who maybe only talks to the grocery checkout store person. And to be clear, like that exists. There are older adults who are extremely socially isolated. I think loneliness goes a bit deeper because it can happen to people who are not socially isolated. It can happen to younger people. It can happen to mobile people. It can happen to married people. It can happen to people on college campuses. And it's this idea that the quality of our connections is not meeting our desired hunger for them. So loneliness is a totally subjective experience. It's the gap between the kind of connection we want to have and the connections we do have. And I started paying attention to it in 2018 when the UK actually appointed a minister of loneliness. Why would they do that? Well, it turns out that being lonely actually has a ton of health consequences. People are rarely just lonely. There are huge correlations with anxiety, with depression, with chronic pain, with stress. And for a place like the UK where healthcare is nationalized, there was real incentive to get to the bottom of this loneliness epidemic so that the whole health of the nation would improve. That's where my investigation began and how I landed upon what would become the subject of my book, The Connection Cure, a solution called social prescribing. And social prescribing is a practice through which health workers, doctors, therapists, nurses, other, health professionals are literally prescribing non-medical, community-based activities and resources the same way they'd prescribe pills and procedures. So art classes, cycling groups. And what I'd found in my book was actually, just as we've laid out, loneliness is one problem, but it often correlates with a lot of other health problems. Social prescribing, even though it may have been originally sort of conceived to address problems of loneliness, ends up addressing things like depression, anxiety, stress, ADHD, chronic pain, trauma, dementia, addiction. So I'll stop there, but I think that's how it began.
Yeah, let's pause there. Let's not stop there. Let's pause. Yeah. So I'm curious because people can hear this and think, oh, it's a soft thing. Loneliness is a soft thing. But there's data on if you are lonely, here's what happens physically, mentally. Or if you're not, here's the benefits physically, mentally. And I can understand in a nationalized system where the incentive really is how do we more cost effectively and efficiently address this, that probably is easier to implement in that kind of structure in society. In a payer provider, like all mixed up kind of system that I think a lot of us find ourselves in the US with different incentives for drug companies and insurance versus the government. How have you seen that translate or not?
Yeah, into real data, sure. So the statistic that the US Surgeon General throws around that comes from research from Dr. Julianne Holt-Lunstead is that loneliness, the health consequences are equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. If you are lonely, you are 40% more likely to develop dementia. You are 50% more likely to die prematurely. You are also 50% more likely to use the emergency room. In the UK, it was found that 1 in 5 people who were going to the doctors were doing so for primarily social reasons, right? So that's like the real incentive. We have the data showing, hey, we have to do something about this, just like we do for any other public health epidemic. But on the other side of that, there's research suggesting that strong social connections can prevent all of the sort of health risks of living in the way we do today, which is, as you know, full well, not the way we're hardwired to live. If you think about why it might be that our bodies react to the experience of being lonely, think about how we evolved. We evolved to survive and thrive in groups. If we didn't have the group protecting us, if we didn't have systems of mutual aid with our neighbors, if we didn't have somebody that felt like we could confide in, trust, rely on, that was really bad for our survival. And so it makes sense that today, one of my favorite stats comes from the Harvard study of adult development. They've been studying the same people since 1938. You know this study? And they found that the people who were the healthiest, who lived the longest, 80 years into this, were the ones who had the closest relationships. This was a better predictor of health and longevity than your social class, your income, your IQ, your genes. Being connected prevented your mental and physical decline. So the data is totally there in both directions.
I completely understand and agree with that. I guess my question a little bit, and maybe it's more of a policy question of, with the UK government kind of paying for everything and saying, hey, we need to find, because the system is getting overwhelmed, versus a US system where we have so many different players involved and the incentives might not always be aligned to the most cost-effective solution to the problem. Given that, you started the research in the UK, right, that you were doing because hey, this is something that's working. They're rolling it out. How has that, knowing it, right? Like, this is stuff we know. This is not a debate. How has that made its way across the pond to us in practice or not? right? Is it just individuals doing it, or do we have this movement at a more systematic level saying, oh no, we need to really, other than the Surgeon General, I get the Surgeon General is putting it out there, but how's that trickled down to how physicians or the health system are engaging with us?
Totally. You're so right to ask about that. I mean, I had the same question. And on one hand, there's no comparison between the US and the UK. We saw that this worked in the UK. We saw that social prescriptions did reduce pressure on healthcare, improved people's health. It was cost effective. But the UK is a system where there's a national healthcare, system run by the government. The government invested in positions called link workers that sort of serve as a sort of link between the doctor and the community to actually be the person who's getting to know the patient, the client, what matters to them, prescribing them something in the community. We don't have that in the US. We have a very big healthcare system, so big, in fact, that it's hard to imagine any one policy that would really help everyone. And so, what it looks like a lot on the ground in the US is communities sort of designing their own social prescribing pilots from scratch. Some of them are mobilizing, for example, on specific kinds of ingredients using funding that's available for art and health initiatives, parks prescriptions. So some of the spread says, hey, we're going to, take what we've got, a really strong research department, a really committed, museum partner or city parks partner that actually wants to facilitate these social prescriptions. And sure, it's going to be small. It's not going to cover, the entire nation, but let's start in our community. So some of it looks like that. And that's been really hopeful. We've been seeing it usually starts like city, community level. Increasingly, states are getting on board. The state of Massachusetts just announced one of the largest social prescribing pilots ever. They have 300 arts community partners. They have a statewide hospital, Mass General Health, getting on board. Really, really exciting. And I'll just end with this. I think the biggest trip up for people is this idea of health insurance. Like, is our health insurance company really going to pay for an arts class? And my skeptical journalist self said, absolutely not. That seems unfathomable. But there'd have to be a way to do this outside of insurance. Turns out more insurance companies are getting behind social prescriptions. Where I grew up in New Jersey, the insurer Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield has started to cover up to 6 months of arts prescriptions for patients at risk of overspending on their insurance. And that's just it. Because the logic is, okay, just as some insurance companies have started to cover gym memberships or produce prescriptions, if it can be demonstrated, and it has been demonstrated, that participating in the arts can lower healthcare costs down the line, is an investment in somebody's long-term health, well, dang, that's a really sound investment for an insurer to cover one arts prescription versus 4 medications, right? So it is hopeful.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point because they're not. You don't have to depend on them being moral or amoral or immoral. It's economic. Say, hey, look, we're a business. We're trying to maximize profits. If you're showing me if I invest $1 here, I save $4 there. As a business, I should do that every single day. It makes a lot. And the produce prescription is a really interesting one. I'd love to come back to too, because I was just having this conversation last weekend with someone about, hey, when you just give bags of healthy food to people, all the health marketers get better. Like, you don't have to track if they eat it or anything. Just give bags of healthy food to people, just plants, and they're going to do better. And they're like, what? That's not a thing. No, it actually is. There's studies. This is how it works. So knowing this, right, maybe you live in a community that notices this and starts implementing it. Maybe you live in a community that hasn't, and you have the wherewithal to get it started. Or maybe you're just an individual saying, you know what, a lot of this isn't that expensive or difficult, and I need to start self-prescribing on this. And so I'm curious for you, knowing what you now know, right? You're well versed in this. How have you changed how you engage with the community and the world around you? What have you put into place in your own life?
Totally. It's a great question. And it's one that hits close to home because truthfully, Andrew, I had not plan to make any major changes to my own life. I can admit, I kind of prided myself on being this journalist who was just going to investigate this, put the data out there. This is for people who are severely lonely, severely depressed. That's kind of what I went into it thinking. But actually, I realized that for all of us, and your book touches on this so well, because of the way we live, because of the way our environments make us less than present in our lives, are more stressful now than ever, all of us can stand to do a little social prescribing to ourselves when we're feeling maybe the precursors of something like clinical anxiety, the precursors of clinical depression, the precursors of loneliness, of ADHD. All of us from time to time can feel sad or distracted or worried or alone. And what I've done in my own life is I've tried to follow the data. I've tried to follow the stories of people who've been given social prescriptions for more extreme manifestations of those conditions and sort of like preventatively prescribe myself. So, like one classic example, there's actually a brand new study, 14,000 participants, showing that exercise is incredibly effective for treating symptoms of depression. I say, okay, Julia, when I'm feeling a little sad or a little exhausted, like all I want to do is just kind of lay and mope. And of course, depression is so much more than that. But some of those symptoms overlap. When I catch myself feeling that way, I say, I need to prescribe myself my running group this week. I need to prescribe myself going to the volleyball court, signing up for a league. I need to prescribe myself swimming or cycling. And, the book touches on, we know that there are healthy behaviors we can all take in our own life. But when we prescribe ourselves some group that's doing it, number one, it's an extra mechanism of accountability. Number two, it's more fun, as your work touches on and this book touches on. It's not just the activity, it's also all the connections we're forming along the way. And number three, it's more sustainable. Just as people can be an accountability buddy for us, we can do it for them and vice versa. So my website really talks about that research and how if we're feeling any sort of symptom of unwellness, I call it, we should find the appropriate social prescription for that particular symptom and go do it. And I promise you'll feel better.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. This is another one that there is good data on. Exercise is more effective at treating depression than SSRIs. Right? It's just repeatedly proven exercise does more there. And then your point of stacking it with that social connection. I think the most recent global well-being report, that I don't remember how many thousands of people they surveyed, but it was saying people who felt socially engaged and connected in doing their fitness, they reported 20% higher well-being scores than those that weren't, right? So you're doing the same thing, but doing it with other people gives you this separate boost. So it's not saying you need to do more or different. It's just doing what you're doing with other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that. I love that. Oh my gosh, 100%. I love those stats. And, one thing that it struck me this was the first chapter in the book, like the movement prescription. And I think, sure, on one hand, all of us know, okay, we should probably be moving more. We probably shouldn't be sitting on our butts all day. No wonder that when we go to the doctor, they tell us to exercise more. And we just kind of roll our eyes and say, yeah, okay. But if we flip the script and say, hey, Andrew, what was like a sport you played as a kid? And, you would have no idea how to get involved with now, but that you might be curious about resuming again. That totally flips the conversation. Same end goal. You're still getting that movement, that exercise. But it's a way that's more fun and approachable. It's this whole ethos in social prescribing of flipping the script from what's the matter with you to what matters to you.
Yeah, this came up. There's a book, Play. There's a very similar, right? As we get older, we're less likely to do it. But a lot of it's, hey, what did you really enjoy doing when you were younger? And then it helps you get back to that place because it may be natural that we play less. But again, there's lots of data. We're happier. We're more creative. We're healthier if we can keep that in our lives. And so instead of what I love about so much what you're saying and doing, it's not I'm having to recreate something or push myself into something that I don't like, but let me find the stuff I do like. And I think exercise is a great point of people say, oh, I hate to exercise. I say, well, what do you mean by that? Like, oh, I hate running. Like, okay, so you don't hate to exercise, you hate running. Do you like, but I love playing pickleball. Okay, then that can be your exercise. Or I like to swim. I mean, they're infinite flavors. It's like trying, licorice and be like, I hate candy. Like, well, there are a few other flavors of candy out there than that one.
Right. That's such a great analogy. Yes, exactly. And it's like, it's like you say in your work, you start with that, start with what matters to you, what's important to you, and build around that. And look, here's the spoiler alert of the book. Like, even though it's true that, okay, exercise happens to be really good for depression, nature happens to be really good for treating symptoms of attention disorders or addiction, stress. But for all of that, like, you're not going to be worse off if you prescribe yourself art for depression, let's say, or cycling for ADHD, whatever it is. More important than, I would say, following the data is following the what matters to you. Because if effective, what all of these things aim to do, this is the spoiler alert, is make you more present, is to use, the title of your book is to get you out of your own head and to get you in an environment that reminds you of your joy, that brings you some purpose, that connects you with other people. It doesn't really matter if it's pickleball or an art class or volunteering. That's just one helpful way to start, and that doctors are using, again, in alignment with the data. But truth be told, they're all pretty good.
And that's, not letting perfect be the enemy of good there, right? It's, right. We say all the time, it doesn't matter if these are the top 20 interventions. Well, 1 to 7 aren't the top for you if you're not going to do them. The most effective could be number 8 because it's what you're actually going to enjoy and stick with. And so it's not this one size fits all. It's understanding what the menu is and finding the flavors that resonate with you. I mean, given that, so knowing what you know and being more social on the fitness, what is your fitness routine like now? I mean, how do you incorporate that to your day or week?
Totally. Well, and that's just it, because I love how you started with the data about SSRIs and how physically moving our bodies can vastly improve our well-being. And I think I know that. I think a lot of people probably know that, but it's just not in our culture. Like, our culture makes it so easy to just be sedentary. And, the gym can feel a little bit inaccessible. I used to be a big gym person. I still am. I still go to the gym. I really like group classes. But where I feel the healthiest, where I feel like I'm getting those greatest well-being gains, those greatest sort of boosts in mood, endorphins, serotonin, is when I run, particularly in the morning. I feel so good throughout the rest of my day. I like to cycle as well. And I like to, right next to me in my closet, I have a volleyball net. And I live across the street from a park where friends and I at the weekends sometimes will just set up the net and spend hours just playing volleyball. So I try to make it running sort of the daily, cycling more the weekly, and sports such as volleyball, the more fun wild card one.
And I love how many amazing ingredients it brings together, right? The movement of the body, the getting outside, getting the early morning sunlight. I mean, this whole concept of inside versus outside is a new one. There wasn't an inside not that long ago. It was all outside. And then the community of being with other people and how you're bringing all that together. That's incredible.
Totally. And I should also say, I do, like I said, still have a gym membership. I still take gym classes. I think building muscle is really important too. For me, that's more the eating a protein bar rather than making a really nice chicken and enjoying it. It's what I do sort of to okay, check the box. But if it were up to me, I'd be doing, sports type things that are less kind of class-based all the time.
Yeah, I mean, that does bring up a good point, because the resistance training, especially as we age, right, the loss of muscle, it's important to fold in. So for some people, that's their 80, and the need to move is the other 20. And so just leaning in to whichever works for you, but then saying, okay, I do need to fold this in every now and then. That's important.
Totally. Exactly.
Now, on that eating the protein bar versus the chicken, what is your kind of nutritional plan over the course of a day or a week? How do you think about nutrition?
Yeah, I think about nutrition. I try to buy pretty much whole foods, pretty few processed foods, pretty few cereals. I don't like to have anything in the house that I personally know is not healthy, because I'm like, why would I even tempt myself?
Right.
So for me, I do try to eat a fair amount of protein, 100 grams of protein, chicken, tuna, eggs, yogurt, cottage cheese, all that, lots of fruits and vegetables. I will say though, I live in New York. Eating and food and cooking happens to be a big form of socialization here with my friends. So when I'm out with them, I would say things get a little bit looser. But when it's during the week and I'm here, I try to be pretty regimented with health when I can.
That approach makes a lot of sense, right? Of saying the times that I control, if I'm going to be here, I'm just going to set myself up for quote success. I know the kind of boundaries, and I'm here to live and I want to enjoy. And so, as my ex-wife told me, when I'd go through kind of different diet things, she would say, just don't be weird. And that's one rule I carry with me. So if I'm going to someone's house, I have no dietary restriction, whatever it is. It's just like, enjoy when you're out with people. That's a different thing than when I'm setting the parameters behind my own four walls.
Totally. That's so funny that I love that she said that. That's good advice. I have a friend who used to have okay, mad respect to whatever people want to do, but he had a glucose monitor on him, and sometimes it would be like a party game, like, ooh, what would make, Pat's monitor spike? He wasn't doing it for a health condition. It was truly just to kind of for fun. But yeah, I think that's a good rule of thumb, because to your point, I think there have been times in my life where I have been more restrictive with myself and have been weird, but it just makes you less present. It makes you thinking about, oh my gosh, I really shouldn't be eating that. If I eat this, I'm going to have to do X, Y, Z. And I just found for me that wasn't a sustainable way to live. And as long as you're doing, you're the best you can most days of the week, I found that stress and in your headness isn't so much worth it.
Yeah. And it sounds like you're trying to get most of the nutrients, everything you need, macros from whole foods. But I believe, like me, you have a love for cold brew and supplement.
What, this?
So supplement with some caffeine and coffee in there. Do you have any supplements you take? You say, hey, look, I'm in New York, I'm in the Northeast, I got to throw in vitamin D in the winter or something like that.
Yeah, I should be better about that. I try to, I talk about in the book also, I had a pretty bad migraine spell and was recommended to take magnesium. That actually helped me. I try to take multivitamins. I probably should look more into the supplements. But I do try to eat like as whole food based as I can and try to get those nutrients from the food I'm eating. But I could stand to improve for sure.
Vitamin D for sure. If you're not doing that, that's one that most people in today's society are. And then on the protein front, you referenced the protein bar. Do you ever supplement with protein, or you're like, look, I'm getting my 100 grams from real food?
Yeah, I sometimes supplement. I have the powder, sometimes smoothies, I'll just pop some scoops in there to try to make that work. But I try, but it's expensive. That's another factor.
Yeah, I wonder, the total cost ends up being of, if you were, depending what that protein source is, right? Like I remember Muta, a dozen eggs is like $14. So there's not a cheap source of protein here.
Yeah, that's true. I think I try to consider all the factors, like, okay, this might be a little bit more expensive, but it'll feel better. And okay, this week I'm saving money, and all right, it might not feel as good, but yeah, for me, cans of tuna are what I love. And they're pretty cost effective. And, you're not the favorite person at the office that day, but you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, that smell when somebody mixes it and then pops it in the fridge and it takes over. Yeah, that's something.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what about on the sleep front, right? Understanding to show up in the world, to be able to engage, you need to be well rested. How with this caffeine habit, you're just showing me your cold brew, and it's in New York, almost 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So you're not I don't drink caffeine after 2 o'clock kind of person. So how do you think about sleep and your sleep routine?
So funny you say that. I think I must speak about cold brew a lot on podcasts because I'm getting a lot of targeted content that's saying you really shouldn't drink caffeine after 2 p.m. And I should. I am trying to crack down on that because of absolutely sleep is so important. I think we're both fans of why we sleep and all the wisdom that Matthew
Walker, yeah, Dr.
Matthew
Matthew
Walker
yeah.
has shared around, sleep quality and quantity being so, so important. I want to aspire to be one of those people that doesn't use an alarm. That's kind of like waking up with the sun. I'm not there yet, but I will say that I do try to prioritize getting 7 hours of sleep. I wish it could be more. I sleep in at the weekends. Weekends, no alarm. I think I'm in a particularly busy season of life right now where I'm traveling a lot to different cities. And, we also know from that book that that's not great, but I know that it's temporary. And I think for sure, as this book tour wraps up, I will be more committed to sleep regularity, not caffeine after a certain hour of the day, creating a really cool, dark room and space, and treating sleep like you would treat any other aspect of your health routine.
And on that, with the travel, right, you're having to deal with jet lag. You're having to deal with sleeping in different beds, different rooms as you're going around. Do you have any practices like unwinding routines or anything that you rely on to help you get into that sleep zone to get better sleep?
Yeah. Blessing and a curse. I think I'm pretty good at sleeping. Like when I am in the bed, I have fallen asleep in some pretty wild places over the years. English class, 7th grade. Sorry, Mr. Silver. I'm pretty good at sleeping. Once my head's down, I'm kind of lights out. But that being said, I definitely find, as Dr. Walker and so many others have shared, that when I'm more active in the morning, I'm more naturally bound to wind down in the evening. And so I think just keeping it cool, keeping the screens away from the bed, that's a big one. And just trying to listen to your body in terms of, okay, yeah, I should really send that email, but my eyelids are so heavy right now. I really should just give in to this because it's going to take me 3 times as long to write the email anyway at this point.
Yeah, I hear these people that work till 3 a.m, whatever it is. Look, I know myself. I am not a productive human after that. I am way more productive if I personally wake up at 5 and then do the work then. Or I've had
So
mornings
great.
where I wake up at 1:30 and they're like, "You mean you went to bed at 1:30?" I'm like, "No, I actually went to bed at 9, but I woke up at 1:30 and I start the workday." It's just I need that sleep before
Wow.
I trigger. I mean, what is your typical kind of start and finish on sleep? Are you consistent across the week?
That's amazing. I'm still reeling at you waking up at 1:30. That's wild.
That's not the normal. I mean, my normal is like 5:30. That's and it's not from an alarm. Like I would never set an alarm of I need to get up at 1:30 to work. But it was just like, hey, I woke up. Oh, I'm feeling energetic. I have some ideas. I'm not going to lay here. I'm going to go start working.
Totally. That's great. I think I'm pretty consistent. The days I take the fitness class, that's at 7. So I try to wake up at 6:30. I try to go to bed then by like 11, probably realistically sleeping by 11:30. It's not perfect, but we're getting there.
Well, I think what makes you say it's not perfect?
I think that In an ideal world, I'd be going to bed a little earlier. I'd be getting up a little earlier. I'd be sleeping a little bit more. I know that I'm least productive at night. Nighttime is when I do my most like admin kind of work
Okay.
because my brain is just kind of zonked at that point. And I can feel, I know that when I have less admin work in the evening to get through, I can go to bed earlier. I could sleep longer, more soundly. I'm so much better the next day. So the root cause is we really got to bring the admin work volume down and then everything gets better.
I mean, there's some efficient EAs out there, that would love to
Yeah.
help you on some of that stuff.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Maybe I should look into that.
Yeah. In terms of investment, right? Like as long as you're putting the time then to your sleep and saying, okay, look, I just bought an hour a day and here's what that hour a day is costing me. But is that hour, if I think about the impact on my cortisol levels, the impact on the plaques that lead to dementia and everything, is that an investment I'm willing to make, each hour? Like if it's costing me $20 a day.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that I'm so glad you brought that up because that brings me to just some really interesting tidbits I learned in the chapter on stress. Like, I think we all can relate to stress. Maybe we can't all relate to deep depression, deep chronic pain, deep anxiety, whatever. But all of us at one point in our life have felt stressed. I put all my money on it. And what we do with stress is we think, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed. I have so much to do. I have so much to do. I have so much to do. And we do that for a long period of time. And the things on our to-do list are not getting shorter when we ruminate about how long that is. But in fact, what research suggests, and this is the story of a woman named Heather in the book who works 3 jobs, is a caretaker for her family, is so stressed about her stress that at first the idea of a social prescription sounds ridiculous. It sounds like another thing on her to-do list. But actually what the research suggests with nature is that when we spend time in it, our attention resets and we actually become better at judging our stressors on the other side of it. Nature is the one thing that can restore our attention capabilities. So instead of saying, oh my God, I'm so stressed, we spend that 30 minutes or so in nature and then we feel more focused. And so we get better at feeling like our stress is more manageable, being efficient in the things we have to do on our to-do list. And that 30 minutes of time, well, some might say that's another investment of time and that's time that I don't have. It's actually a time saver in the long run, just like sleep in that way.
Yeah, I go back to this time I have or don't have. And, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Ariana Huffington, they all get the same 24 hours. Now, granted, they have a lot more help in different parts of their lives, but Elon's also running X and SpaceX and Tesla and other stuff. And it just comes down to prioritization. And it's fine if the answer is, look, I am choosing to do this job and work these number of hours, or I'm choosing to do this for my children these number of hours instead of this. But it's still making a decision of I'm going to prioritize this time versus this other time. Being in New York, right, on the stress management, what you know about nature, how do you put that in practice? Like, is Central Park basically the only place you can do this? Like, what does that look like? Or do you get outside the city?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll just say I've loved to hear you talk about the same 24 hours thing and your map, your Google Calendar rather, really puts that into perspective. Like, I think so many of us are horrified when we see our phones now have the feature where we see how much screen time we spend. I wish we had the same feature for our brains. Like, I spent 30 minutes today ruminating about how I have to write this email that I really don't want to write instead of just writing the freaking email. And so to your question about New York, I think it's both a blessing and a curse. We have actually a lot of parks here. One of my first jobs was an intern counting the number of parks we have in New York, and it's pretty astronomical. I live in Brooklyn, where I live very close to 2 beautiful parks. I live near the waterfront. And, there's some mixed research saying what's the experience in parks or gardens, sort of curated nature experiences versus being in the woods or the wild savannah. I think as with most things, like the purer you can make it, the fewer distractions you can have, the better. But that park is certainly better than nothing. And some research suggests, one of my favorite studies from this book found that they compared two groups of people who walked outside. One of them walked in a city park, and one of them walked also outside, but along a main boulevard, a highway. And by the end of that 90-minute walk, the people who walked in the park had, first of all, they self-reported feeling more calm, more well, whatever. But physiologically, fMRI scans showed that the park walkers had less activity in their subgenual prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that is associated with rumination. So, in other words, even though they were both outside, the people who were in the more park, the more nature equipped environment ruminated less. So, I think that should tell you something. And I mean, at the same time, New York is beautiful, and there are certain streets that they might not be beautiful naturescapes, but they remind me of my favorite musicians, of my favorite artists, or nostalgic memories. They bring up other sort of warm, distracting thoughts. So I think that with all of these social prescriptions, it's never a one size fits all. It's kind of like about making sure that the place offers people a variety of escape from environments that remind them of their stress.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'd be really curious on if you had a separate group that didn't take the walk, didn't get outside, or was walking on a treadmill inside, to compare it to and say, hey, look, maybe walking on the street's not as good as walking in a park, but look, you still get all these benefits. And I think kind of an equivalent of the gap between 0 minutes of movement a day and 10 minutes is thousands of times bigger than the gap between 10 minutes and 60 minutes. Just getting something done is so much more impactful than nothing. So I'd just be curious of, hey, are you getting no benefit? I imagine just getting outside in the first place is providing some benefit and all that.
Absolutely. I think that's the perfect way to think about it. There are studies that show that, yes, just, I think it's like 12 minutes of nature, 30 minutes of walking. I mean, all of that is good. It has a significant effect on our health. I saw you just had someone else on your podcast who made a similar point, like something is better than nothing. But, if we're aiming for like the gold standards, which I think our cities and built environments should, we should try to provide as many distraction-free, stressor-free environments as we can.
Well, and knowing which one's better, like if you can go left to the park or right into town, say, oh, well, I might as well go left because I know that's a bigger benefit. For me, I live kind of in a busier part. We don't have much sidewalks. Like the walk, it's not super natural. You're on the street. And so a lot of my time spent in the ocean swimming. And I had this concern of like, does this count as nature? And then our mutual friend, fortunately, Adam Grant, in one of his newsletters, like, actually, time in open water is even better than time. I was like, yes, thank goodness.
Yes, totally. And you could like understand physiologically why that makes sense. Like, I mean, oh gosh, the cold water thing for so many reasons. Sunlight, we know, is so good for us. It's why people are taking cold showers like crazy. I mean, the physiological rush of the cold water. And again, I think there's something very like primal and human about us being in these sort of untainted environments. So yeah, keep up the swimming.
And fully distraction free, right? Like the temptation for me, if I go for a walk, to have my phone with me and to check it is very, very different than if I'm swimming. There's nothing with me. I got a pair of goggles and a swimsuit.
So true. Wow, I never thought, swimming is one of the prescriptions that's profiled in the book. It helps a woman go from the maximum dose of her antidepressants to the minimum. I never thought about the phone aspect. You're so right.
That was the chapter, the wild swimming, like the cold where you're jumping in it, because you went and did it with them, right? Like
I did. It was truly wild. I thought, you hear the description. It's like, women who had started out as novice swimmers in their 50s. I thought, okay, I could handle this. Naive, because no, I get there and it's freezing. It's really hard, but it's so good. It's so rewarding. And, they're coaching me on how do you slowly acclimate to the temperatures. They're teaching me how to do box breathing. They're teaching me all these techniques. And it just made so much sense to me that this would be medicinal on so many levels, and including the not having my phone. That is such a great point. I'm going to carry that going forward.
Yeah, on that. So you've mentioned a couple different things, right? The box breathing, the time in nature. You've tried a bunch of different things, as part of your research, as part of writing this. Do you have a consistent mindset, stress management practice? Do you incorporate either daily of, hey, consistently at this time I do this thing, or when I notice X, I go and do Y? Or maybe you have both.
Yes. And that comes back to sort of, I think this is the promise that social prescribing has for all of us, that when we feel certain symptoms of unwellness, which our modern living environments make so endemic, whether that's stress, worry, grumpiness, loneliness, sadness, there are different social prescriptions we can pull out of our back pocket. So for me, lately, again, being in the thick of this book tour, kind of waking up in a new hotel every day, and sometimes feeling a little bit stressed about my stress, I think back to the research, I think back to the people in the book and say, my non-negotiable is that I have to get outside. I do this in the book. I prescribe myself bird watching. And I go to a group that does it every Saturday here in Brooklyn. We have this incredible bird watching group. It started out as 5 people. Now it's 100 people. But even when I'm not with that group, when I'm alone, like later this week, for example, I'll be in Cleveland, Ohio. I will try to go outside, whatever that means. If I have to wake up earlier, if I have to sack off, some meetings, I will do it, because that sort of, even if it's just 10 minutes of stillness and looking up at the sky and looking at the trees and feeling the sunlight, is my medicine. I've never been a yoga person. I've never been a big meditation person, unfortunately. But this just feels like what I imagine people feel when they meditate and do yoga, is that sort of calmness and zen that lasts them throughout the day.
And my understanding for meditation, it's less about that time on the cushion than about being able to build that awareness for your time away from the cushion and when you're in life. And it seems like, as you described, the bird watching, of this awareness, this focus, this awakeness to what's happening around you, you're building a similar mindset and skill set as you would, I would think, meditation. So it's just finding what it is for you. Just like we said with exercise or whatever it is.
Absolutely. And you putting it in those terms, and I've heard other people like Dan Harris is so great about talking about this. It doesn't have to be meditation with a capital M, where there's, you're sitting on a map and you're in a hot, sweaty room and some instructor is using these buzzwords. Like, that's just never resonated with me personally. That's not really what matters to me. I'm open. Maybe that could change, but I do think you're exactly right, that sort of extreme presence, as I like to call it, that comes from, whether it's bird watching or gardening is another one, that awareness of my environment, my thoughts. That's what those activities bring me. That ironically, by like having an activity is how I find that sort of zen and calm and peace.
That's amazing. There's this quote from Quentin Tarantino that I really like about, it's not learning until you put it into practice. And what I loved about this conversation, kind of following you, is you've learned so much from your research, from your work, and you live it too, right? It's not just, hey, this is words on a page. It's now here's what it looks like in practice. And I can't thank you enough for coming on today and sharing all this, not just the insights, but also what it looks like in practice in your own life.
Oh, thank you so much, Andrew. Well, inspired by you, inspired by so many others who forged that path of saying, hey, this problem that I'm having in my life, it's probably likely that other people are having it too. It's probably not you. It's probably a product of the way we're living. And for me, I sort of arrived at that conclusion the other way. I reported, as I do with everything, as a journalist, sort of on the data, the systemic solutions. But then I really was so moved by the stories of people who'd been given social prescriptions that it just was such a no-brainer to try it for myself too. So I hope your listeners feel the same.
I can't imagine they won't. Now, we've talked about all different ones, right? Like all different areas of health, all different social prescriptions or otherwise. And you certainly cover a lot in the book. Rather than it being overwhelming of saying, oh, there's too much, I can't do anything. If someone's listening to this saying, I want to get started, and understanding it's not a one size fits all, but where would you, from what you know, recommend people take that first step?
Yeah, absolutely. I would recommend if they had to just start somewhere, because you're right, it's so overwhelming to even think about that cardinal question, what matters to you, right? That's the whole shifting from what's the matter with you to what matters to you. You might be like, well, a lot of things matter to me. My family matters to me. My religion matters to me. My job security. It's almost like too big of a question. So I like to break it down into smaller ones. Questions like, if you had 2 more hours in the week, what would you spend it doing? Or what is something that you loved to do as a child but haven't had a chance to do so since? Or bringing in some of the more modern concepts, questions like, what is one activity that completely absorbs your attention that feels like nothing can distract you when you're doing it? That's called flow, right? Or what's something that, gives you full body chills when you think about experiencing it? When was the last time you experienced full body chills and sort of gave you an experience of something that transcended your current understanding of the world? That's called awe, right? So it's getting people to really reflect on these health creating experiences. And then whatever they might answer, that's step one. So sorry, it's 2 steps. Step one, finding out what matters to you through these specific questions. Step two, finding a group, a community-based group that connects to the answer. There are resources on my website, socialprescribing.co. There are more and more platforms, I think, where we're seeing that are trying to make these community activities sort of more available and prescribable. But I would start there. And for those who are saying, okay, yes, I could do all this, but how can we make this mainstream in US healthcare? It sounds cliche, but like talk to your doctor about it. Talk to your doctor about social prescribing. There is a tremendous movement among US doctors, therapists, nurses at a website called Social Prescribing USA that's trying to make this mainstream by 2035. So let's hope, we have to be the change and we have to ask for the change, I think, too.
Yeah. And we certainly need the change, right? What we're doing is not financially or health-wise sustainable. It is the definition of unsustainable on all fronts. And so I just love this get back to the human element. And it's cost effective. It's cost efficient. It's the right thing. So just, again, can't thank you enough for your work on
Likewise.
the lot of health. Do you have a guilty or guilt-free pleasure? You say, hey, yeah, this probably people on the outside would say that's not that healthy, but it makes life like worth living.
Yeah. Oh, I have like 5,000. I mean, we've already talked about the cold brew, but I mention a lot in the book because it's well known among my friends. And I live in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, which is like the donut capital of the East Coast. And I am on a first name basis with not one, but 2 of the local donut people because, in my one precious life in the donut capital of the world in this era, I'm not going to, I'm not going to give that up. So that would probably be a big one. Although we could have another hour to talk about them all. But that's what I love about social prescribing is because it's not, I think some of the most sustainable health advice is about like not restricting yourself from anything 100% of the time ever. Maybe there are a couple of things, but in general, like it's really just about building your routine so that most of it is in the direction of health. And those things should feel good, you know? It should feel good to eat mostly healthy. It should feel good to be doing what matters to you. So, yeah, that's my take on that.
Yeah. I mean, there's no point in extending life if you're not enjoying it, right? It's like the
Yes.
people on vacation are like, oh, the food's terrible in such small portions, right? Like, no,
Yeah.
let's make it worth living before we worry about extending it. It's got to be both.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Julia, I have enjoyed this so much. Knowing how busy you are with the book tour, with everything else you have going on, the fact that you took the time to come share your story and your journey and all the things you've learned over the years, I can't thank you on behalf of our listeners and myself enough. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Back at you. Thank you for paving the way for this. Your work has changed so many people's lives, and it's such an honor to be here.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Home of Healthspan podcast. And remember, you can always find the products, practices, and routines mentioned by today's guests, as well as many other Healthspan role models on alively.com. Enjoy a lively day.